Greetings, dear brothers and sisters. I feel honored and privileged to be able to speak with you all on a subject which is important as well as very close to my heart: church planting in Pakistan in the post missionary era. Time is limited, so without any further ado, I would like to start with giving you a short historical overview of the Indian subcontinent and of the missions as they started. As most of you might know, the Indian subcontinent, the modern countries of Pakistan and India as we know them, and even Bangladesh, it was conquered by the British in 1857. And soon after their conquest, the British established East India Company. And shortly after the establishment of the East India Company, British missionaries also began to come in. And shortly after the British missionaries, even the American missionaries were allowed to come in this part of the world and evangelize the higher caste Hindus, Sikh, Muslim, and initially by 1881, there were only about 4,000 Christians. So, as a matter of fact, we could probably say that their initial efforts failed. But by the early 1900s, in 1904, the Great Awakening from South Korea, Wales, and the and the U.S. Came to Punjab, and by 1910, it was at its peak, and that is when the mass movement of conversion of the scheduled caste started in this region. And by 1931, there were over 400,000 Christians in this region. But by that time, almost all of the scheduled caste had become Christians. So the conversions slowed down. But of course, the missionaries continued their work. Some of the things that the missionaries then began to do were providing education, providing medical facilities, as well as vocational trainings as a as a way of reaching out and continue and for the continuity of preaching the gospel. Now, uh, these uh, these ways or methods did work, providing education, providing medical facilities, even vocational trainings. But after 1920, even though by 1931 there were 400,000 Christians, actually by 1920, the conversion of the scheduled caste and others in this region had slowed down. So the uh, efforts continued. In 1947, we had the partition, and the subcontinent became India and Pakistan. So some missionaries then remained in India, and others came to Pakistan. And as I said, Pakistan also inherited some amazing educational institutions, such as Gordon College, such as Women Christian College, and even the hospitals and vocational training centers. And through those hospitals, educational institutions, and vocational training centers, the efforts to plant churches and to evangelize the majority community, which in Pakistan at that time was Muslims, continued. Um, but as a matter of fact, even though the missionaries had resources, the missionaries had educational institutions, hospitals, vocational training institutions, their efforts did not bear much fruit. And as a result, even today, the population of Pakistan is 96% Muslims, about 2.1% Hindus and others, and only about 1.9% Christians. Now, this is a brief overview of the of the subcontinent, the start of missions in this part of the world, and then the partition and the subcontinent becoming India and Pakistan. And later, of course, we had the addition of Bangladesh, which at one point was part of Pakistan, but then became a separate nation. So the missionaries, basically Western missionaries, continued planting churches, doing missions, evangelism. Uh, but uh, part of the reason why we, as the Pakistani Christians and particularly as Pakistani leadership, consider this a post missionary era, because after 9/11, much has changed, particularly in Pakistan. After 9/11, lots of missionaries were refused their visas, and those missionaries who had visas, their visas were not extended. So missionaries, in one way or another, had to exit the country, and their numbers kept dwindling very fast. And at this point of time, we only have uh, 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 probably about 200, 250 missionaries left in the country. So there has been a transition uh, from the Western missionaries now to the national leadership. Western missionaries, because of their visas being refused, had to leave. And so uh, the leadership has now been transitioned to the national leadership. Along with that, also power and authority. Uh, so uh, this is why I personally consider this a post-missionary era. So in this post-missionary era, how is missions, how is church planting, how is evangelism continuing? Let me move quickly to our own ministry, Bethel Evangelistic Organization, uh, which is also uh, part of this new movement where national ministries, national leadership, national missionaries have now taken up the baton, and they are doing church planting evangelism, not only amongst the majority community, but also amongst the Hindus and Sikhs. So in 2009, my wife Ruby and I started this evangelistic outreach to the Marwari in the south of Pakistan. And by God's grace, we met with a wonderful team of Marwari pastors who became our partners. And as a result of their partnership with us, the church planting among Marwadis started. Uh, not to say that it started with us. There was already work uh, done by missionaries and even Pakistanis among Marwadis. But with this particular group of people who became our partners, we started our own effort. So when in 2010, this evangelistic outreaches and missions outreaches started, there were only about uh, 500 people that this group of faithful leaders was reaching out to. But by God's grace, in the last 12 years, that 12, 13 years that we have been planting churches and doing missions outreaches to the Marwadi in South and in in Sindh province, as well as in South Punjab, we now have over 2,000 believers. And the number of churches when we started this effort was only about 20, which has now grown up to about 130, or let's say about or more. Now, a Marwari church uh, can be anything from one family to 100 people. Any Marwari church that is about 50 or beyond is already a mega church, because evangelism to the Marwari is not an easy thing. But by God's grace, this work is successfully in progress. And uh, Our method of work is simple. We don't have resources like the Western missionaries did. We don't have resources to build big educational institutions or, or hospitals or even vocational training centers. But what we have is relationships. So mostly our work is based on building relationships with Marwadis in their villages, and as a result of those relationships, people hear the gospel, they accept Christ, and and as a result of their accepting Jesus as their Lord, churches are planted in those small villages where these Marwadis live, and that's how the work has successfully continued, and it's in progress. And we believe that in the days to come, more Marwadis will accept Jesus because there is uh, a growing acceptance for the gospel amongst the Marwadi. Now, that's briefly our story. So now that we are in this post missionary era, what has to be done? Well, first and foremost, the unfortunate, and which is kind of unfortunate, the Pakistani church is still not self propagating the gospel. So, what needs to be done now in this post missionary era is that the Pakistani church has to take up this responsibility fully for planting churches, for doing missions, for doing evangelism, for taking the gospel to particularly the majority community in this country. There are already a number of ministries and movements that are reaching out to the Hindu community in this country. There needs to be more efforts to reach out to the majority. 96% people are still Muslim. Secondly, I personally believe that in this post missionary era, we do not need just individuals with a burden and with a vision for missions and for evangelism and for church planting. Rather, we need Pakistani missions movements, maybe a Pakistani mission society, you know. So there has to be mission movements now, not just individuals doing this work, or not just one ministry or two ministries, but rather a mass movement of church planting. We need to train, equip, and empower the national leadership, the national missionaries, the indigenous missionaries. Unfortunately, from my own experience, I personally feel that the church, the indigenous leadership, is pretty underprepared. Not unprepared, but underprepared. One of the reasons may be because the Western missionaries had to leave abruptly, and many of them, although they did train the local indigenous leaders, but we need more training, equipping, and empowering of the local leadership, the indigenous leadership, the national leadership. We also need partnerships and collaborations from our brothers and sisters in other Asian countries, or as well as the Western countries. So, church planting ministries from Asia as well as from the West need to now collaborate and partner with national missionaries so that the church planting movements can succeed and can continue their work. We also, of course, need financial assistance to carry on this work. Our country at the moment is in a great political turmoil, and everything in this country has become almost inaccessible, particularly for the poor. So even ministries, as we all know, need finances. So not just partnerships and collaborations, training, equipping, and empowering, but also financial assistance for national ministries that are involved in church planting, that are involved in missions and evangelism. And I believe with all of these steps, there are ministries in Pakistan. They may be small, but with all of these steps, we can succeed to plant more churches, to do missions, and to do evangelism. Even though the Western missionaries have left, the national church can do it, and the national church has to be able and become capable of self-propagating the gospel. Now that we have transitioned into this post missionary era. The Pakistani church has existed in this region for more than 100 years, even before the partition of India and Pakistan. And the Pakistani church can do it. The Pakistani church has to do it. And we need your support, we need your prayers, we need your love. Thank you so much. I pray that this brief presentation will bless you, and our time together will be a time of blessing for all of us. God bless you.